Tenae Stewart from Sebastopol is a practicing cottage witch, a certified astrologer, a coach, a published author. She's on a mission to embody simplicity in magic, astrology, and self-care. Her work empowers modern witches to nourish their minds, bodies, and intuition so they can be their most magical selves all day, every day. Tenae is the author of The Modern Witch's Guide to Magical Self-Care and her latest book, which we're here to talk about tonight, The Modern Witch's Guide to Natural Magick. In that book, Tenae shares her knowledge of natural magic to celebrate and channel the energy of life's seasons. The book includes the basics of blending teas and oils for relaxation and celebration, the metaphysical and magical properties of common plants, and natural recipes and rituals to celebrate and channel the energies of each season. So now that I've told you about the book, Tenae is going to tell you about the book. So I'm going to turn it over. Thank you very much for coming, everybody, and please enjoy.
Thank you so much. So I'm Tenae Stewart, the Witch of Lupin Hollow, and we're going to be talking about natural magic and the seasons and the moon and astrology and plants and all kinds of really good stuff today. So this is my new book, The Modern Witch's Guide to Natural Magic. It's my second book. My first book came out in October 2020, The Modern Witch's Guide to Magical Self-Care, which was the last time I was here with Copperfields. And all of my books, both of my books and all of the work that I do is really about helping you connect with yourself and connect with nature in really simple, accessible ways. If you feel called to magic, called to witchcraft, called to astrology, it can feel really overwhelming, right? Because there's a lot of different options for ways that you can practice. There's really no rules in witchcraft. And so it's really awesome to be able to find ways that work for you, right? To be able to get grounded in a practice that makes sense for you and that really lights you up and that fits into your real life. And so my books are really about how you can have a magical practice, a magical life, without necessarily, having to be a mystical witch who lives in a cottage on the edge of the forest, right? We can be magical in our real daily lives. So let's go ahead and get into our topic for today. So today we're talking about magical correspondences and celestial alchemy. So celestial alchemy is the term, the system that I use and that I talk about a lot in the new book. So the idea of celestial alchemy is basically this concept that there are overlapping cycles of nature, cycles that we usually learn kind of separately from one another, right? We learn them distinctly. And these are the cycles of the seasons, the cycles of the moon phases, and even the cycles of astrology, of the planets. So the sun, the moon, the planets are constantly in motion. They're constantly moving through the 12 signs of the zodiac. And we typically learn them as three totally distinct things, right? So if you are interested in these topics, you've probably read a little bit about astrology. You've probably read a little bit about the moon phases. You might have even read a little bit about the wheel of the year, of the seasons. And there's usually books are about one of these, right? Or maybe two of them. My new book is about all three, which sounds a little crazy, but it's actually less ground to cover than you might think, because all three of these cycles are really, really inextricably linked together. So I call this celestial alchemy because as I started to learn these things for myself and to discover how these cycles are interlinked, I realized that they really become more than the sum of their parts when we work with them all together. They become even more potent and magical. And alchemy is the idea that we can turn one material, one object, traditionally iron, into something more valuable, traditionally gold. So the alchemists of the Middle Ages were trying to turn iron into gold. And so the idea of celestial alchemy is that we're taking these systems that are all powerful in their own right and all meaningful, and we're transforming them, and we're transforming ourselves by combining and interlinking them. So here's how this works, okay? So it always starts with the seasons. It starts with the sun. So the sun spends 1 month roughly in each of the 12 zodiac signs every year, okay? So there's 3 zodiac signs in every season, 4 seasons, 12 signs. For example, we'll use spring as our example, okay? So in the springtime, in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun is in Aries, which it's currently in Aries. It's in Taurus, and it's in Gemini, okay? And this is true every year. In fact, the spring equinox actually occurs when the sun reaches 0 degrees of Aries. So the wheel of the year and the equinoxes and the solstices are actually all very astrological. They're also very connected to the lunar cycle. So the moon phases are actually interlinked here. So the moon spends 2.5 days in each zodiac sign, okay, moving through 4 basic phases. So the 4 basic phases of the moon are the new moon, when the moon is completely dark, the waxing moon, when the moon appears to be getting larger and larger in the sky, and the full moon, of course, everyone's favorite, when the moon is completely illuminated. And then the waning moon, when the moon appears to be getting smaller and smaller. So we have these 4 phases. And as the moon is moving through these 4 phases, it's also moving through the 12 signs of the zodiac every month. Now, here's where they start to come together, okay? So the new moon, when the moon is totally dark in the sky, can only occur when the sun and moon are exactly aligned in the same sign of the zodiac. So the new moon is always in the same sign as the sun. So for example, during Aries season, right after the spring equinox, we always have the new moon in Aries. And then the full moon is always in the opposite sign as the sun. So every sign in the zodiac has a natural opposite. The natural opposite of Aries is Libra. So during Aries season, we always celebrate the full moon in Libra. And in fact, the full moon in Libra is this Saturday. So the seasons, the equinoxes and solstices, the moon phases, and astrology are all actually one system. So in March and April every year, we have the spring equinox, we have the sun in Aries, we have the new moon in Aries, and we have the full moon in Libra. And what I love about that is how it takes all of these different systems that seem really complex, and it really brings it down to basically 4 really simple bullet points, right? For each month, for each season of the year. And of course, the planets are also always in motion through the zodiac signs, and we can add those in to add in even more layers of nuance. But even just working with the sun and the moon and the 12 zodiac signs like this is incredibly powerful. And what I love about it, and what my new book is really designed to do, is to help you experience the change and flow of the moon and the sun. So the moon is constantly ebbing and flowing through its phases throughout the month, and the sun is doing the same throughout the year as it moves through the 12 signs. And so these cycles really give us so much permission to be exactly where we are in our own cycles. So, need some tea. All right, so what exactly is Natural Magick, right? The title of the new book. So what we're doing in the new book is we're talking about all of these systems, we're talking about all of these cycles and how they might show up for you personally, but then we are using plants to help us get grounded in them, right? Because especially the astrology piece can seem very abstract, but even the seasons and the moon phases, right? They can seem somewhat outside of us. And plants are a really wonderful way to get more grounded in all of this abstract information, to bring it down to earth, to make it more tangible. So if you've been interested in magic or witchcraft for any length of time, you've probably heard the term magical correspondences. And correspondences is a very big and complicated sounding word to basically just say that every plant and every crystal, we're mostly talking plants here, every plant has corresponding pieces of information, okay? It has a corresponding element, a corresponding planet, and a corresponding zodiac sign, as well as corresponding properties, right? What types of magic you might want to use a given plant for. So correspondences are really just all of the information that comes along with each plant. And what I love is that this information, these correspondences, are actually not random at all. If you pick up a book of correspondences, you might be like, where the heck did this information come from? Who decided these? Why is this plant associated with this planet? It grows on Earth. But there is actually some rhyme and some reason. It's just that most books don't really talk about it. And so I really wanted to really get into correspondences in this new book because I think they're actually really, really beautiful and powerful once we start to learn what they are and what they mean. Okay. So we're going to talk about all of these different corresponding pieces of information and how you can actively use them. One other thing that I want to say before we do that, though, is that plants are our allies. And throughout this book, I talk about this idea of plant allies. Plants have wisdom. They can guide us. And they're not just tools that we, take and use as we please. Working with plants as allies is a really great way to, bring more sustainability into our practice, both physically and spiritually, right? It's so important that we have a lot of respect for the plant itself. If you're going out and you're harvesting plants, you want to make sure that you're not taking too much and that you know what you're using the plant for on the practical side, but also on the energetic and on the spiritual side. Plants have lots and lots of spiritual power. And so you can work with a plant, even if you don't actually have that plant in front of you, you can connect with that plant's energy spiritually. And so I really like to think of plants as our allies and as guides that can help us to connect with lots of different types of energy. Okay. And so the reason that this particular book, I'm talking about all these abstract cycles and then bringing the plants and the herbalism aspect into it is because plants can really help us, like I said, get grounded, right? They're bringing us down to earth. They're helping us to really put our hands on these abstract ideas of celestial bodies out there in space, right? They're helping us take all of that energy and really experience it in our own way and in our own lives. Okay, so let's get into what correspondences are, how to know what plants correspond to which elements and planets and zodiac signs, and what to do with that information, okay? So everything always starts with the elements. The 4 elements are fire, earth, air, and water. And these are really the building blocks of everything. They're the building blocks of the universe. You can pretty much relate anything and everything to one of the 4 elements. And this is where correspondences, magical correspondences, begin. And you can actually pretty much pick out which plants are associated with which elements based on the plant itself. Okay, now this is an art, not a science. It's not exact, and there are some nuances, but this is pretty much the basics of it. Okay, so fire plants that are ruled by the element of fire, are typically those that are spicy, spiky, thorny, or hot in some way. Okay, so for example, cactus and chili peppers are both fire plants. They have like a fire vibe. Now, earth plants, and this is very interesting, earth plants are actually the most rare. And that's partially because every plant is associated with the element of earth, right? By nature of growing in the earth. But plants that are specifically ruled by the element of earth are mostly those that either we primarily use the roots from them, like burdock root, for example, or those that grow underground. So potatoes or any kind of tuber is ruled by earth. But most plants are not ruled by the element of earth because everything is. Now, air plants are predominantly those that are very fragrant or that bend in the breeze. So lavender is a great example because it does both. It's very fragrant and it's very flexible. Or things like grasses or mint. Air plants are one of the most common. And then lastly, water plants are predominantly those that grow in water, that are night blooming because the moon controls the tides, or that have a high water content themselves. So for example, like lotus grows in water, aloe has a high water content, or jasmine, night blooming jasmine, blooms at night under the moon. So you can see how we took some really like esoteric, complex ideas, and they're not actually so complicated, right? They're actually rooted in something tangible and relatively simple. Now, of course, there's always a way to make it more complicated. Not every single plant quite applies to this. For example, roses are usually considered to be a water plant. They don't really fit any of the water rules, but water is the most sensitive, emotional, intuitive element. And so energetically, roses are typically considered to be a water plant. But this is also a very intuitive process. And although if you open a book of correspondences, it's going to tell you specifically what element and what planet rules every single plant you can think of, that nothing is ever gospel. So if you feel like roses should be ruled by air because they're fragrant, then you can go with that. This is totally intuitive and there really are no rules, okay? Now, once you've determined the element of a plant, you can narrow it down to planet and zodiac sign, okay? This is really just a process of elimination. So I like to go to planet first. So fire plants are usually ruled by the sun, makes sense, by Mars, also makes sense, right? The red planet, or by Jupiter. Earth plants are usually ruled by Saturn, or occasionally by Venus. Air plants are usually ruled by Mercury, Venus, or Uranus. And water plants are usually ruled by the moon, sometimes Neptune or Pluto, and occasionally Venus. You'll notice Venus does triple duty. That's because she's the only goddess energy, the only divine feminine energy in traditional astrology other than the moon. Just a little bit of patriarchy that we're unpacking from traditional astrology. Now, once you've identified the element and you've identified the planet, or you've narrowed it down to at least a couple of planets, you can then also narrow it down to the zodiac sign, okay? Now, let's say you've narrowed it down to the fire element, and it's either the sun, Mars, or Jupiter. But you're like, okay, well, which one is it though, right? Which one rules this? So you want to think about the characteristics of each planet in the element that you're looking at. So for example, the sun has a sunny disposition, right? Mars is fierce and passionate. You can turn to the mythology here. Mars is the god of war. That tells you something about that energy. And Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. It has this big, generous energy, right? So you can see, okay, there's 3 fire planets, 2 plus the sun, but they're all a little different, right? They all give us a little bit of a different energy. So for example, to put this into action, sunflowers are ruled by the sun, that cheerful, sunny energy. Chili peppers are ruled by Mars, right? They're kind of fierce. And cloves, interestingly, are ruled by Jupiter. Most spices like cinnamon and clove, things like that, are considered fire plants. And cloves in particular are ruled by Jupiter because they have this little bit more subtle energy, right? They have this generous, like warming vibe, but it's not like a fierce outright attack like chili pepper, right? So you can see how it's actually a lot simpler than it sometimes seems on paper. And I think that it's even sometimes made out to be, because it's very intuitive. It's very even logical in a lot of ways. It can be both of those things. Now, each planet rules 1 or 2 zodiac signs. So once you narrow it down to the planet that you think it is, it's pretty easy. Okay. So the sun rules Leo. The moon rules Cancer. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Mars rules Aries. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Saturn rules Cancer. Uranus rules Aquarius. Neptune rules Pisces. And Pluto rules Scorpio. So once you've got it to the element, you can pretty much get it to, maybe 2 or 3 planets. And once you've got it to the planet, you can get it to the zodiac sign. Now, why do we care? What does this do for us? It's interesting. It's, a puzzle to play with, but what does this do for us? How does this help us connect with our magic, connect with our intuition? How does this help us practice self-care? All of these pieces of information is to say that you can choose plants to work with based on whatever is happening in the sky, happening celestially. So, for example, like we talked about at the beginning, right? We have these kind of little units every month where the sun is in a particular sign. We have a particular, festival or solar event. We have a particular new and full moon. And you can choose plant allies to work with based on any or all of those, which is really the guiding force of my new book. So you might choose a plant ally to work with based on what sign or season the sun is in. So for example, we're currently in Aries season. So you might choose to work with a Mars, Aries, fire-ruled plant like chili pepper. You can choose to work with a plant ally based on what sign a new or full moon is happening in. So we had the new moon in Aries a couple of weeks ago. So again, Aries season and the new moon in Aries plants are going to be good there. The full moon, so this weekend, Saturday, is the full moon in Libra. So you might choose to work with Libra plant allies. Some good Libra plant allies are rose is a good one. Orchid is a good one. Vanilla, anything that is really heart opening, right? And Libra being ruled by Venus, being any one of the elements basically, but mostly air. So you can choose plant allies, either turning to a book of correspondences to say, okay, I'm looking for, a plant that's ruled by Venus or that's ruled by Mars. What plants are calling to me? Or you can do this intuitively, right? You can ask yourself, okay, if I want an air plant, that means it's going to be fragrant. And I want one that's ruled by Venus and ruled by Libra. Those two have to do with the heart. They have to do with love. What plants come to mind for me? Because like I said, this is very intuitive. It does not have to be out of a book. It does not have to be, this is what someone said, this is what someone decided last year or hundreds of years ago in the case of some books of correspondences. It doesn't have to be based on that. It can be, and there's a lot of wisdom in that, but there's also a lot of wisdom in choosing plants to work with, plants to ally with, based on what you feel called to, knowing what the energy is. Now, another way that you can work with plant allies in this way is to create balance. So for example, for Aries season, right? Aries is the sign of Mars. It's the sign of the warrior. It's fiery, it's active, it's passionate. And sometimes that can be really motivating. And sometimes we want to align with that to motivate ourselves. And so you might want to choose a plant that's ruled by Aries to help with that, right? So our chili pepper example. But sometimes you might find that the energy of a particular sign or season is too much. You might feel burnt out by Aries season. You might feel overstimulated by Aries season. And so you have a couple of great options to work with plant allies to help heal and balance that experience. One is always to work with a plant ruled by the opposite sign. So turning to those Libra plants like we were talking about, which you're probably going to want to work with, especially around the full moon, but anytime during the season to create balance. However, you can also turn to a different element. So for example, for fire, if you're feeling overstimulated and like you can't sleep, you can't rest, right? If that's how you're feeling right now, you might want to turn to an earth plant to help you get more grounded. So you might want to turn to a root, right? Something that is going to be grounding and calming and soothing to your nervous system. Creating balance through plant allies, both medicinally and spiritually, can be really powerful. It's a great way to really create mental and physical balance. Now, another way that you can work with plant allies, and this is kind of taking it a step further, is when a planet enters a new sign or enters a retrograde. So we haven't talked a lot about the planets in their movements, and I don't get into that as much in the book. So this is a little bit of a like extra bonus material here, but it is really, really powerful. So throughout the book, I'm sharing recipes, dozens and dozens of recipes for either aligning with the energy of a particular sign or season, or creating balance in the case of the full moon. But you can do the exact same thing with all of the planets, okay? So just as the sun is moving from one sign to the next throughout the year, so do all of the planets. So Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, they're all constantly in motion. And they're not necessarily always in the same signs as the sun and moon. And so if you're really interested in astrology, working with plant allies is a great way to bring all of that kind of cosmic knowledge down to earth. So for example, Mars entered Pisces today. The day that we're doing this, we had a transit like this. So Mars entered Pisces. Mars is the planet of action and passion, right? We've talked a lot about Mars. Pisces is one of the most sensitive and emotional and intuitive signs in the zodiac. So you might work with Pisces plant allies to help you align with this energy of this transit. Or you might work with Mars plant allies, right? Either would be appropriate. One of my favorite ways to do this, though, is when working with retrogrades. So all of the planets retrograde. The sun and moon, of course, are not planets and they do not retrograde, but all of the actual planets in our solar system do. The most common and familiar, of course, being Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year for 3 weeks at a time. But Venus and Mars are also really impactful retrogrades as well. And working with plant allies during a retrograde period is a great way to really nurture and nourish yourself during what can sometimes be otherwise a challenging time. So what a retrograde literally is when a planet appears from our perspective on Earth, appears to be moving backwards. Now, it's not actually moving backwards, it's actually an optical illusion, but it does happen on a predictable cycle. And retrogrades happen in a particular sign. So for example, in a couple of weeks, in May and June, Mercury will be retrograde in Gemini, and then it will appear to move backwards into Taurus. So we have a Mercury retrograde in Gemini and Taurus. And what a retrograde is in any sign is essentially an opportunity to press pause. It's an opportunity to reevaluate. It's an opportunity to release or to rest, right? All of your words are always appropriate during retrogrades. And particularly with a Mercury retrograde, Mercury is the planet of communication. So it's very often an opportunity to reevaluate the way that we are showing up in our communications. It often means there's extra typos, there's email breakdowns, there's tech issues, right? But really those are just a reflection of things that were already broken or already needed to be fixed that are coming up to our attention, right? That Mercury retrograde is bringing to our attention. And so it can be really, really frustrating, but it really is here to help us. And so plant allies are a great way to support ourselves through those retrograde periods that might otherwise be super frustrating or tense. So for example, there's two great options here. Either, again, you can choose plant allies that are ruled by the sign that Mercury is retrograde in. You can choose plant allies that are going to be balancing to those signs. Or third option, actually, you can just work with any Mercury plant because anything that's ruled by Mercury is going to be extra highlighted and extra potent during those retrograde periods. So for example, a Gemini plant ally that would be great is mint. A Taurus plant ally that would be great is oats, like rolled oats, very grounding, very soothing. And a Mercury plant ally would be lavender. Really soothing. It's really going to bring a lot of calm to your nervous system during a time that might be a little bit activating, you might need a little bit of extra calm, right? So working with plant allies in this way, whether you're working with them for the sun and the seasons, for the moon, for planets or retrogrades, is really, really powerful because it's, especially now, there's so much information out there about astrology, which is so exciting. So many people are getting into it and really discovering how supportive and helpful it can be, but it's often very abstract information. And so I was really excited to write this book and talk about astrology in an accessible way. We're not getting super deep. We're not getting into degrees and aspects and all of that. I love all of that, but this wasn't the place for it. I wanted to keep it really simple and accessible while also finding ways to bring it all down to earth. So the way the book is organized is the first half or so of the book is kind of instructional like this, talking about herbalism and correspondences, and all the things. And then the second half of the book is all recipes. So I'll show you how it's set up. So there's a chapter for each of the 4 seasons. And then within each season, there's information about the equinox or solstice that season with some journal prompts. There's recipes for the equinoxes and solstices. And then there's recipes for the new and full moons in each sign. So there's recipes, there's journal prompts. There's also plant profiles with journal prompts towards the beginning. So you can really move through the entire year making really, really simple recipes. These are not complicated types of herbalism. I am not an herbalist. I am just someone who makes a lot of tea, works with essential oils, works with really simple, accessible forms of plant magic and plant allies. And so I really wanted to write a book for other people like me who, might want to work with plants, but aren't sure where to get started with it. So all of the recipes are really simple, really accessible. A lot of it is tea blends and diffuser blends for essential oils, with a few other things mixed in, some craft projects and things as well. But really, really simple things, really accessible, really easy ways to connect with nature. So I think that's everything. I think that's everything I've got. We can definitely take some questions. I would love to chat about this and answer your questions about all of these things. Oh no, you're still muted.
I'm just not good at pressing buttons today. I actually have a question before I get to the audience questions. By the way, people, please feel free to put some questions in the chat. We have some and we have time for more. So my question is sort of an abstract one, I guess. If you are someone who doesn't necessarily feel called to magic, but would perhaps want the maybe grounding influences or motivational influences of this, do you think that someone in that case would still benefit from, looking into your recipes, or do you think that it is a more spiritual calling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would definitely say that there's a lot of different ways to approach this. So for example, on the one hand, you might work with plant allies in a really spiritual way, right? You might meditate on them, you might do magic with them, but none of that is necessarily necessary for receiving their wisdom, right? Like we can work with plants in so many different ways. And in fact, although I am a witch and I do magic myself, my practice is very, very simple, very subtle. And a lot of the ways that I work with plant allies is just choosing what tea I'm going to make on any given day, and aligning that either with the season or with the moon or with something else that's going on. And so I think that it can actually be in many ways a very intellectual experience of saying, okay, this is what's happening. This is the choice that I'm intentionally making to interact with this, cosmic thing that's going on, and, really reflect on it. It can be very secular. It can be very intellectual. I think that magic, this is totally my opinion, my perspective. I think that magic in and of itself does not necessarily have to be spiritual, but it is for me. But I know lots of people that approach magic from a very secular perspective. So I think working with any of these tools, whether it's the solstices or equinoxes, the moon, plant allies, astrology, any of it, you can make it as spiritual as you want to. My practice is relatively spiritual. I really work with the planets as guides, as deities, as, something very metaphysical, right? But you can take a really practical approach, and still get a lot. I shouldn't even say still get a lot, and get a lot of wisdom from it. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, now I'll turn to the questions for the attendees who aren't me. So we have one from Retta who asks, what about using cleavers for adrenal tonic at this time of year?
Okay, so like I said, I'm not an herbalist in and of myself here, but I will say, Aries season can definitely be very activating to our adrenals, can really bring up a lot of adrenaline. So anything, and if you know that that's something that you're really impacted by, this is a great time to really bring in some really soothing energy for that. Because just by its nature as a fire sign, as, really the most active sign in the zodiac, Aries can really bring a lot of that energy up for us. So yeah, working with plant allies or other tools to really support your adrenals during Aries season, I would say absolutely.
And then a question from Maureen. How do you see your work with plants as compared to what is done at Findhorn, Scotland, or Paralandra, Virginia?
I don't know. Are those like herbal centers? Let me know. I will have to look into them for sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what they're doing in those places.
Paralandra sounds like a wonderful place for plants and herbalism. But they talk to the divas of the plants to help them grow, Maureen.
Oh, got it. Thank you for clarifying. I will definitely look into that. I would say the work that I do is a little bit different. This work is less about the sort of tending to the plants. I do some gardening. I do grow my own plants. But this particular work is more an herbalist perspective, a very, accessible, easy herbalist perspective, of kind of what are we doing with the plants after we've harvested them? How are we receiving their wisdom either physically, right, by consuming them in tea or, other kinds of drinks or tonics, all different sorts of things. Or how are we receiving their wisdom by just being around them, right? Diffusing their oils or anointing ourselves with them. There's lots of different types of recipes in the book around that, actually working with them externally. Or how are we receiving their wisdom on a purely energetic level, right? So I don't really talk in the book about flower essences, but flower essences is one way to work with them on a more energetic level. But also, I really enjoy just meditating on a plant, really kind of meeting it in meditation. You might do a combination, like diffusing the plant as an oil, and then also, meditating on it at the same time is a great way to kind of bring in multiple layers of interaction with that plant. But yeah, I love that. I love the idea of actually working with the plant while it's growing as well. That's kind of like another layer to it. I was really intentional with the plants I chose to include in the recipes in the book. There are quite a few of them, but I made an effort to make sure that most of the plants are in more than one recipe, so that you don't necessarily have to buy 10 million plants or grow 10 million plants to be able to interact with these recipes. So you can buy a few and use them in lots of different ways throughout the year. But I would definitely say, growing your own plants and interacting with them feed or from a starter plant up to actually harvesting it and working with it is adding another layer is really, really powerful as well. I hope that answers your question.
So I have a couple more. I have a follow-up. Maybe it might be, this is in the Q&A. So this actually might be another version of the same question from Rita about how she would make an adrenal tonic this time of year with cleavers. But I'm not sure, that might be just a restated.
Yeah. Like I said, tonics and tinctures and more complicated types of herbalism, I dabble with them, but I couldn't speak to them. But like I said, I would definitely say, supporting your adrenals during Aries season, during a fire season, always going to be a good choice.
Well, that actually sort of leads into the next question, which is from Michelle, who is excited to read your new book, which is very exciting. But she's also curious if you have any other favorite books on astrology or magic in general to recommend. And then if you have any books on tinctures or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's go by category. Okay. So on the herbalism side, I had, actually, it was very funny. My boyfriend is on live and he will laugh when I say this. While I wrote this book, our coffee table was pretty much covered in all of my favorite herbalism books for like 3 solid months. So some of them are, one of my favorites is Mixing Essential Oils for Magic by Sandra Kynes. Excellent. It's like one of the only books I've seen out there that's really specifically about essential oils in this kind of context. Absolutely love that one. I would also say, what were some of the others I was using? One of the Blackthorn books, I can't think of the exact title off the top of my head. It's by Amy Blackthorn. It's Blackthorn's Botanical something. That's a really good one. The Illustrated Herbiary by Maya Toll. All of Maya's books are amazing, but that one is definitely my favorite. There's a couple of others that I definitely used. The Witching Herbs. There's so many. I mean, there's so many really, really excellent books about plants out there. Definitely one that is kind of universal and that, kind of everybody should have a copy of is Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. It's kind of the classic book of correspondences. And it definitely has the downside where it doesn't really tell you where any of this information came from. And it is, I will say, even as I was writing this book, there are quite a few plants that are not listed in it that are more and more common now. But with those caveats, it is an excellent book, very helpful, and really great for starting to get a handle on how correspondences work. So I definitely say all of those. Astrology wise, my favorite astrology book is Intuitive Astrology by Elizabeth Rose Campbell. It's an excellent book. It's really in many ways kind of a workbook guiding you through your chart, and guiding you to understand, how all of the planets interact and show up for you personally. Definitely my favorite. Another favorite would be You Were Born for This by Chani Nicholas. I think Chani Nicholas is really one of the best modern astrologers, and anything she puts out is excellent. And then magic in general, let's see. The Green Witch by Erin Murphy Hiscock is an excellent one. It's like the #1 bestseller always, and there's a reason it really is good. Intuitive Witchcraft by Estrella Taylor. My bookshelf is over there. That's what I'm looking at. The Witchcraft Therapy by Mandy M. And Moonology by Yasmin Boland. That one's more astrology, but a really, really good one that takes a specifically lunar astrology approach. So those are a few of my favorites.
I have one more from Angela, who loved your first book and all of your work on self-care and astrology. And will your newest book be incorporating self-care into its use of plants as well?
Yes, definitely. So it was actually funny because I had written a lot of this book before I went back. I'd written most of a draft and I went back and made sure that I was really aligning, coming back to the point of self-care with every chapter. Because I really do find that all of these systems, all of these tools are incredible tools for self-care. One of the biggest reasons why I wanted to write this book and why I was excited to write it is because really flowing with these cycles, especially the cycles of the seasons throughout the year and the moon throughout the month, were really, really life-changing for me. They really helped me start to understand my own energy, start to be able to support and nurture myself more intentionally and more intuitively, and really just understanding like how I feel at any given time throughout the year is really powerful, right? You stop being kind of blindsided by your own emotions, by your own moods, by your own, how you feel physically, right? By needing more rest at a given time. And instead of being kind of blindsided by those things, you can know that they're coming. You can give yourself permission to be in them. And then bringing the plants in is such a great way to get grounded in all of that, right? Because I know sometimes it's really easy to be like, okay, it's Aries season, and I know that this is how Aries season affects me, and I know all of these things, and then to do absolutely nothing about it. And that's okay, right? Sometimes it's just the awareness is enough. But sometimes it's like, oh, I wish that I had actually prepared for this, or I wish that I had, done something more to support myself through knowing that I was going to feel overstimulated or burnt out or whatever it might be, right? Or even like really motivated. Sometimes it's a good thing, right? Sometimes we feel super motivated and then we feel like we wasted it, right? And so plant allies can be so just wonderful self-care for helping us to prepare, to support, to take advantage of however we're feeling at any given time. So yes, definitely. I made an effort to make sure I was kind of bringing it back because I could like talk about all these topics in a million directions. So I went through one of my final drafts and was like, okay, how does this help us practice self-care? How does this help us practice self-care? Because I really think that all of this is so essential for our physical wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, etc.
Does anybody have any last questions? Pop them in the chat quick. Well, while we're waiting for the last ones, I want to say that Tenae's book is available. Both of her books are available on our website. And also the latest book is available in all Copperfields right now. I checked. So you can go to any store and pick it up. Her former book is also available at most of our stores, but we can easily special order it if you come on into any Copperfields. So I think that you have answered all of the questions about this topic. We know everything now. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today, and thank you all for coming and listening and participating. It's always such an honor to host our authors.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for really great questions. I love answering questions and making sure that I'm talking about what you want to hear about.
Wonderful. Well, we hope to see you all in the store soon, attendees. And today I hope that we can do an in-person event. That would be so nice to meet you in person.
Yes, I would love that.
All right. Have a nice night, all. Thank you all so much for coming, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.